Oh, there you are. You're muted. There we
Oh,
go.
here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you this time.
Yes.
Right, right, right. So how's it going?
That's going great. I'm glad. I'm so glad that we can get this to actually work.
All right. Seems like Zoom will have to be the backup medium uh, for me in case that ever happens again on StreamYard.
Right. Well, did you ever find out what happened last week?
I did not, but my second interview I had on there worked fine for some reason. I was like, oh, okay, this is working fine, but for some reason the other one didn't. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a really weird problem.
Well, this is recording right now. So when we're done, I will send you the link on Dropbox or something to
Right.
where you can have so you can get it and then edit it in whatever way you need to.
Yeah, I gotcha. Alrighty, so it's ironic because you're the host, but I'm interviewing you, so it's like,
Well, so it's upside down, but that's okay.
yeah. All right, so welcome to the interview. I'm not sure if it's a podcast yet, but for now, I'm just a guy doing interviews, trying to help out
Okay.
authors and other creatives in any way I can. Uh, you know, is there before we start the show, I'd just like to establish some chemistry.
Sure.
Is there any subjects that are like off limits or, you
No, no, I can talk. I'm happy to talk about my work. I'm even wearing a T-shirt from one of my books.
oh,
Uh,
okay, gotcha.
um, do you know when you're going to air this?
I'll do it as soon as possible. So
Okay.
it'll probably be sometime tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
take it
Right.
because I work the night shift, so I have to get up in the morning and do
Right.
all that stuff. So I'll probably post this tomorrow and just just put it on YouTube.
So send me the link, and I can cross promote it when you have
Okay,
it up.
got
And one of the things I'm going to want to talk about, I have an event coming up in January, but it's almost full. It's a coaching
okay,
group. It's a coaching group for writers. So I'm happy to talk about that for a little bit and maybe help fill up the last couple of slots. But mostly I'd like to talk about my books and how my creative process and maybe offer some inspiration to some other writers and just take it from there.
all right. Well, with that being said, let's get started. So,
Okay.
just tell me about Mark David Gerson. What
Oh,
do you
wow.
do outside of writing? Like, what is a day in the life like for you?
Well, these days my life is a little bizarre because I have been on an open-ended road journey for almost 2 years now.
Yeah, okay,
So my days depend on where I happen to be and what I happen to be doing. And right now I'm in Placitas, New Mexico, which is just about 20 miles northeast of Albuquerque. I'm house and pet. I'm house and pet sitting.
oh,
So
okay,
this is not my house behind me, but it is a house behind me.
right.
And my focus these days is still writing. I coach writers. I lead workshops and coaching groups, which we'll talk about a bit later. And I'm also a photographer, and I have a dog who will probably show up at some point. Um, um, as will maybe the other two dogs that are here with me now. Um, so it's a pretty quiet life. If
Okay.
I'm traveling, then I'm on the road, going from place to place. In some cases, doing events. In some places, just in my own space.
Right. Okay. Nice. On the road again.
Yeah, or
Right.
still.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I think there's like I don't know, there's a certain allure to life on the road, like you're never in the same place for too long. And there's some points where either you're on a highway or you're on a plane or you're on a bus and you're just looking at that open road, and you're just seeing like life play out before your eyes.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's something very romantic about the notion of the road trip. This is really more of a spiritual journey for me. It's a kind of a combined spiritual journey, writing trip, and kind of informal book tour. Um,
Nice, nice.
so the road trip portion is I don't generally know from one day to the next where I'm going or where I'm going to end up. It's kind of the way I write, the way I teach writing. It's very much in the moment. And I just go I go where the story of the road takes me instead of where the story I'm writing takes me.
Gotcha, gotcha.
But it's nice to stop for a bit. And as I say, here I am in New Mexico, where I've lived before and may yet live again. Who knows? And just enjoying being back here. It's a lovely setting where I am in the hill. It's kind of a rural subdivision, and it's just rolling hills leading up to the Sandia Mountains just over there, which kind of form the a 10,000-foot backdrop to Albuquerque.
You're right, right.
It's quite lovely, and happy to be here
All
for as
right.
long as I'm here, which will be another couple of weeks, I think.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So, what inspired your first novel? If you go back that far, right?
I can go back that far, although it is a lot far to go back.
Right. Or you could go with your current novel, if you
No,
want
let's go back to the first novel because
to go back.
then
All right, let's go back.
we can go up. We can rewind that clock all the way back 30 years. Uh,
Okay.
in fact, 30 years this year. I was teaching a writing workshop. I was living in Toronto at the time. I'm originally from Canada. I was living in Toronto at the time. I was teaching a writing workshop in my living room. And I was leading I'd come up with an exercise that used a tarot deck. And I had everyone pick a card and then led them through a kind of open eye visualization based on the card and they were writing. And a little voice in my head said, okay, now you pick a card. And I picked a card and I started to write. And what I wrote that evening became the first scene of the first draft of a novel I knew nothing about, a novel I had no conscious desire to write, but
Right.
something I was curious enough about to keep going on, and that became my first novel, my first book. And that
Oh,
was The Moon Quest, which is the first book in this series. But it wasn't designed to be a series. It was just designed to be a one-off book. I wrote the book, and that was good at the end of it. And it turned first into a trilogy, and
yeah.
now I'm working on the fifth book, and I already know there's a sixth book. So
Right, right.
it kind of took over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some stories just do that.
Yeah.
You write it and you intend for it to be a standalone. Like, you know what? I'll write this story one time and then that's it. But then, there's something about it that, inspires a continuation. And before
Well,
you
in fact,
you know,
that's happened twice
take
for me because I have another standalone book, not fantasy. Same thing happened with it's a novel
yeah.
set in the 1990s, largely in my hometown, which is Montreal, and it was a one-off. It was another one-off story. And,
Right.
but in that case, readers kept reaching out to me and saying, "Well, what happened to so and so, and what happened to so and so?"
Right.
And but the so and so's they were interested in knowing about it wasn't the so and so I was interested in knowing about. There was a very unpleasant character in that book. The novel is called Sarah's Year. Um, and there's a very unpleasant character in that book. And I was really curious to know how she became the super bitch, really, that
Right. Got
that
you.
she was. And so I wrote a second book, which is really her story. And then there was a third book. So then
Right.
suddenly there was, and now I think there'll be a fourth book, but
Okay, gotcha.
that's down, that's farther down in the queue
Okay, gotcha. It's like, oh,
of
the
books to write.
wait.
I've got a very long queue of books I've started and books I haven't started that want to get written. So
Got you, got
I
you.
should be at this for a while yet.
Yeah, man. I don't know how I could do with a long queue. Thank God I have a short queue of like series that need to be written. But
Well,
the thing,
the
you know,
problem is the longer you're at it, the longer the queue gets.
ah,
The queue starts short, but
Yeah,
then it just kind of does this, you know?
right. I don't know, but for me, like I can't like I gotta finish something before I move on to the next thing. Like even if it's not a series, I gotta finish the book first before I switch over to something,
Well,
you know?
that was me once upon a time, but
Yeah,
apparently the books have a life of their own,
yeah,
and and sometimes one story pushes another out of the way to get written first.
yeah. Sometimes it's like,
So
nah, you know,
yeah, so
right,
I have started. See, there's the fifth book in this series. I've
right,
actually written an opening scene to that fourth book in that other series. That's two books. I
yeah,
have two memoirs in progress,
right,
maybe three. I say maybe three because two of those may get merged.
right,
So we'll say two and a half.
right.
um,
Gotcha.
um, and then there are the books that I know are down the line. So
Yeah.
and there are one about three of those that I can think of off the top of my head. So
Right.
I have and more keep getting added, you know, to the bottom
Yeah.
of the list.
Oh man.
So I know it's crazy. It's crazy.
We gotta find a way to like, we gotta have like proteges as writers and like, you know what?
Well, you
I'm
know who is it?
gonna to you when
James,
I
I think
go.
is it James Patterson, the thriller writer, who actually comes up with the plots and has other people write the stories for him.
Yeah. I mean,
So
like, like I'm gonna pass it on to you. I don't
yeah,
have enough time to write it. I would write it myself, but I gotta pass it on to you. Write this, put my name on it, put it out there.
and right. I don't know that I could do that. Maybe I'm too much of a control freak around my stories to do that, but you
Yeah.
never know. You never know.
All right. Shoot. I can afford a ghostwriter. Like, you know what? Here's what the story's gonna be. Finish that series off for me, and while I go write this other stuff. All right. So, how do you come up with characters in your, series? Like, are they spontaneous or meticulously planned?
I don't meticulously plan anything. I
Oh,
don't plan, I don't plot, I don't outline, I don't, even with the screenplays I write, I have no index
answer.
cards.
All right, let's do it.
I have, and I don't even call it a pantser. It's not because it's not so much writing by the seat of my pants. It's
Right.
listening for the story and letting it tell me what it is.
Oh, okay, got
So what I say in my
it.
writing workshops and in my books on writing is the story's smarter than I am,
Right.
which has proved itself many times. And if I get out of the way and let it write through me, then I get the best story possible. So the characters show up as the story progresses.
Okay.
With Sarah's year, I had two characters and an idea. But by the time I finished my first day's writing, the idea had changed. And
Mm.
there was a brand new character who I hadn't envisaged, who was now a main character. So even when I think I know what the story's about ahead of time, I'm usually wrong.
Mm.
Um, that actually happened in the third book of that series as well. I had a very strong idea for what I thought would be the third story. So like a great idea. I began writing it. I wrote the first scene, thought it was crap. It just did not feel right. Ripped it up, started all over again. It was a whole different story. The title stayed the same because I had title would still work, but the story was different.
Right. Got you.
So the characters, when people say, "Where do your characters come? Where do your characters' names come from?" Well, those are their names.
Right.
It's not like I sit down and say, "Well, what should this character be called?" That's the character. My characters are as real to me as you are, which probably makes me a little bit psychotic. But but yeah, I mean, these are as I'm writing them, these are real people.
Right.
They have to be. If they're not real people to me, how are they going to be real people to you as you read
Right.
it?
Got you.
Um,
Got you.
so the names that so sometimes the names change,
Right.
um, but when the names change, it's I think because I didn't quite get the right name the first time around.
Okay. Got you. Got you. So it's a more intuitive approach to writing.
It's
Okay.
a it's an entirely intuitive approach to writing. Yeah.
Right. Got you. Got you. So This is probably obvious, but for the people out there. So, what are some of your favorite genres to read? And are there any books that you recommend to first-time readers or
Oh
people
God.
something new?
So never ask a Libra to name anything because Libras are known for being indecisive. Never ask a Libra for his favorite anything because so my usually when people say what's your favorite book, and I'll say that my favorite book is the book I'm reading right now. That's my
Right,
stock answer. Um, um, I don't read fantasy anymore because I don't really want to be influenced by other people's worlds when I'm
right,
writing mine. What I read mostly is fiction. I don't even read. I used to read a lot of nonfiction. I don't read that anymore. I'm always looking for a good story and really interesting characters. That's what I read. I have a little bit of a weak spot for mysteries, and I think because my life, at least on the surface, appears to be so disordered and in the moment. I think I like stories that begin with chaos, which my life often feels like, and end up with some kind of order and resolution. But I can't find order and resolution in my own life. I find it in a mystery. But
gosh,
I like pretty much any novel that has a good story and compelling characters that isn't horror. I do not.
right, gotcha.
I can write. I mean, there's some scenes in the Moon Quest and the second book, the Star Quest, that are pretty gruesome. I can
Right.
write the stuff. I can write the stuff that the story demands it. Although I don't like to write that stuff, I can't read it. I can't watch it. Um,
Okay, got you.
um, I think. I think maybe because it all just feels too real.
Right,
And if it
right.
doesn't feel real, I don't want to read it because then I'm not entering into another world. I'm just reading words on a page. I want to be in the other world when I'm reading it. And
Got you.
if it's graphic and gruesome, it just isn't a world I want to be in.
It's like, nah, I'm good. Yeah, no, I think it's like as you get older, you start to veer in a different direction. It's like when you're younger, you can withstand the intensity of that, like, gruesome, horror filled type of
Well,
stuff.
I don't think I think I remember I was when I was a teenager. I went to see I met a bunch of friends to see The Exorcist, which of
Yeah,
course is now ancient history, but it was pretty and it probably looks pretty cheesy now given the advance in visual effects. But
yeah,
at the time, it didn't look cheesy at all,
right.
and that was the last horrific movie I saw. The first and
Really?
the last. Yeah, I just
Oh man, he's like, yeah, no, we're good.
can't not doing it. Um, actually, I had same attitude toward roller coasters. I don't do roller coasters either.
Right. Okay.
I was tricked onto a roller coaster when I was a teenager,
Ah,
and the next time I was in a roller coaster would have been um, 15 years ago when it was my daughter's 10th birthday, and we were on the Santa Monica Pier in LA, and she wanted to go on the roller coaster, and I did it for her, but
right.
I would never do it for anybody else, and I would never do it again. And that roller coaster is like it's not a baby roller coaster, but it's not like a Six Flags roller coaster either.
Right.
And she wanted to sit in the front, of
Oh
course.
man.
Yeah, and she wanted to go around a second time.
Right.
Um, and there's these attractions where they have a photographer taking your pictures, and they sell the pictures at the end, right?
Yeah.
So I get off the roller coaster and I see my picture, on the wall
Yeah.
for sale, and my face was as white as a sheet.
Right.
It's it was. I probably should have bought the picture just because, but I thought, oh, I can't even look at the picture. So
Right.
I looked horrified. I looked terrified. So
Yeah.
I don't do that either. Um,
Oh man. Okay. Gotcha. So, like, what's the most difficult thing about being a writer, in your opinion?
Most difficult thing about being a writer. Um, and the first thing that comes to mind is it's solitary. You're working in a vacuum.
Mm,
Um, um, and you don't really know. I mean, I'm single now, so it's not like I have people. I have a partner to bounce stuff off of. I'm just writing what I write.
Right.
So I think the solitariness of it is hard. The marketing of it is a pain in the ass. But that's not really the writing process. Yeah, I would say that the just just the solitary nature of it. At the beginning, I think, with the Moon Quest, the book, that first book we talked about, I think the hardest part was trusting the story.
Mm.
Again, I didn't with that story. I could have joked that it could have snuck up on me, banged me on the head like those old caveman cartoons that dragged me into the
Yeah.
cave to write it, and I didn't know what I was doing. And of course, the story being fantasy did not have to make conventional sense, and it was to that date probably the biggest surrender of control I had ever done, and
Mm.
it was really really hard.
Right.
Now, for the most part, I trust the story, even though the one I'm working on right now is kind of every book I think, at least for me, pushes me harder as a creative artist because why would I write it otherwise? And this latest book, which is the one that follows this one, um,
Right.
the story I'm about 35,000 words into it, and I'm still struggling to figure out what the hell it's about.
Right.
So,
Right.
so that's hard. That's hard. But I've done enough of these to be able to trust that it will it will sort itself out in the end, and I will know because the story is smarter than I am, again and again it's shown that. So if I get out of the way and let it do its thing, it'll work
Right.
out. In fact, with this book, The Bard of Bryndoon, which was the fourth book in a trilogy, I didn't expect there to be a fourth book. Um,
Right.
um, I was so self-conscious about the story because it's written in a bunch of different first-person from a different bunch of different first-person
Yeah,
points
I
of
got
view, and I had never done that before, and I was very, very insecure.
you. Got
And I and then when the first reviews came in, people were saying it was the best book I'd ever written.
you. Mm.
So that tells me something else, that my insecurity is irrelevant. And again, I have to trust the wisdom of the story.
Got you. Got you. And speaking of, like, I actually, have a second book that I need to write. In my, in my very first like novel, actual fantasy novel, I always knew it was going to be a trilogy, but the second book that I'm writing actually has a dual perspective. Like the
Mm,
first book is from the main character's point of view
right.
throughout the entire story, but the second book is actually going to split in two and tell two
Hmm.
stories at the same time. But they're going to intersect at the end, and then
Oh, cool.
yeah. I haven't written it yet, but like I have
It's
it.
it's playing around. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mapped out. And I'm just like, oh, because I've read books like the Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and
Hmm.
he does that. Like he has chapters where each chapter is a different character's perspective, but the continuity of the story is still there. So that's
That's in fact what this is, and that's in
yeah,
fact what the next book is. Although the next book has even more character point of views than this one did.
yeah,
So, and it's all first person. So each chapter is a different first person point
yeah,
of view, continuing the story.
yeah.
Um,
That's yeah,
so yeah, it's challenging to keep the story straight.
yeah. Especially when you
Um,
have like multiple characters telling their version of it at the same time.
right,
You know?
right,
But I think
absolutely, yeah,
one and one. Like I'll have the main character tell the story from his end, and then I'll have like maybe the second main character tell the story from her end, and then
right,
those two will just intersect, when they
right.
meet up and things like that. Well, yeah.
Cool.
So,
So why aren't you writing
uh,
it?
yeah, for me, I gotta focus on, I gotta survive first, like rent, life, stuff like that, because For some, I can't focus on like higher concepts like creativity if I know the rent's due and I
Right.
gotta, pay all these bills and stuff like that, and save money and things like that. Like I want to be in a comfortable place where I could be like, okay, that's done. Now I have the space to focus on this without worrying about other stuff because that stuff gets
Well,
away from me. Like that's just
I hate to I hate to say this, um, but life always has a way of getting in the way.
yeah,
Always. So the writing coach in me would say to you, don't keep putting it off. Even if you can only write, 10 minutes a day, don't keep putting it off.
right.
Um, because life will always have something to throw at you. If it's not a bill to pay or the rent to pay, it'll be something else because
That's
that's just that's life. Exactly.
life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your process from like start to finish when writing a novel?
Well, like I mentioned, I don't outline.
Right.
I don't. Um, I don't do character work ahead of time.
Right.
Um, I'm not like J.R.R. Tolkien and build this entire world from scratch, right down to
Right.
language before I start. Um, I just start. So I just start
Mm.
um, with um, the Bard of Bryndoon. Um, the book I didn't think was going to happen because at the end of the third book, you got the Moon Quest, the Star Quest, the Sun Quest. It all sounds like the end, and the villain gets dealt with by the end of the Sun Quest, and everything seems to all the loose ends seemed to tie up. So I was convinced that was the end of the story. And then
Right.
one day I woke up. I was living in Portland at the time. I woke up. I thought, I think there's another story. Well, how can there be another story?
Right.
Everything, all the loose ends are tied up. So, well, you know what? I'm gonna just sit down and write a scene. And
Right.
I actually wrote the first scene as a screenplay scene, not as a novel scene. And I just began to write, and in that scene, a young boy, I don't know, 7 or 8, is being told a bedtime story by his mother. And the bedtime. So in this time, it's many generations after the Moon Quest, the Star Quest, the Sun Quest. So those
Right.
stories are myth and history. And so she's telling him the story of the Sun Quest, which is his favorite story.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm just writing the scene, and normally he has always fallen asleep before the end of the story.
Right.
On this day, he's awake when she says the end, and he sits up and he says, "But it's not the end." And she says, "But it is. That's the end of the story. That's the story that's been passed down. There is no other ending." And he says, "No, that is." And he argues that isn't the end of the story.
Right.
And he says, and then he quotes the Moon Quest, which again in that time is a story, right, from the past. And
Yeah.
he says, in the Moon Quest, doesn't Ulisha tell Toshar is the main character in the Moon Quest, that, and I can't remember the exact phrase right now, but he quotes from the Moon Quest where she says something like, um, um, there is always a continuing to every story. Stories don't end.
Mm.
And as I'm typing this into my computer, I think, holy crap. Of course, if that's true, then this story must be real because the story doesn't end and there is more story.
Right.
So it's like my
Man.
story came back to tell me there was more story. And
Oh,
so I knew there was another story, and that
man.
became the Bard of Bryndoon. And in the end, I put the screenplay version on hold, and I went back and started it again as a novel, and then I wrote the screenplay adaptation after. But that's the story that was told in from multiple first person points of view. Moon Quest, Dark Quest, Sun Quest, all told from a single first person point of view. Different characters each one, but a single tale.
Right.
And this time it was all these different characters.
Right.
And I was confused because I thought, how am I ever going to keep this straight in my head? Again, I had no outline. I didn't know where the story was going as I was writing it.
Right.
And to my amazement, which again proves to me that the story is way smarter than I am,
Mm-hmm.
when I finished the book, the final draft, not one of those chapters had to be moved around.
Wow.
I wrote them in the correct sequence. Now I'm
Oh.
not sure that's the case with book five. Maybe it
Right.
is, maybe it isn't. But with book four, with the Bard of Bryn Dune, every every chapter stayed where I put it in that first draft. Um, so again, when I say my stories are smarter than I am or know themselves better than I do, that's what I mean. I mean, if I write, I'm not writing by the seat of my pants.
Right.
I am from the deepest place I can be connecting with the essence of the story and
Right.
letting itself tell itself to me and through me. And the better I'm able to listen that first time around, the closer that draft is to the final draft. No, it's never
Got
the final. It's never the final draft, certainly.
right.
But it's if the Moon Quest took many drafts over 13 years before it was published,
Right.
um, the Bard of Bryn Dune was, I think, from from conception to publication was less than 2 years.
Got you.
And,
Okay.
and part of that time I was traveling, so I wasn't actually working out every day.
Right. Got you. Got you.
So, and that's what I teach. And I teach people how to listen for the story.
Oh.
I teach people how to go inside and listen for the story, and all my techniques that I teach, and the guided meditations and guided visualizations and the coaching that I do. It's all designed to get you to the place within you where the story already lives.
Okay.
So I would say to you that your story, which is playing around your head, in a sense, is already done.
Yeah.
Your job is to listen for it and get what's done onto the page, in a sense, to take that energy and put it into words on the page.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what I do, you know, in as I write, and that's what I do when I teach as well.
Okay.
Um,
Got you. So, what's the most unhinged thing that you've written in your novels? Any of them? Don't worry,
Unhinged.
that's here.
All right, unhinged. Well, I'm not sure if this is unhinged or not. Um, but I mentioned to you that there were some pretty gruesome scenes in the Moon Quest and the Sun Quest, and less so in the Sun Quest, even though it's even more gruesome in the Sun Quest. There's scenes of torture in the Sun Quest, so that's pretty nasty. But when what happened with the Moon Quest is that I wrote the first draft in the third person. I wrote the second draft and subsequent drafts in the first person, so it was a major rewrite. And after I finished the second draft in the first person, I felt that um, the other three main characters um, just did not come across as fully developed enough because it was all being told by one person, and there was no omniscient narrator. So I sat down in a meditative kind of place, and I told you my characters to me are very real. I sat down in a kind of meditative place with my, and I was writing longhand with my notepad and my character across the table from me.
Right.
And I said, "Tell me about your life."
Right.
And two of the characters told me things that were so horrific
Yeah.
that I did not want to write them down, but I did. And
Right.
once I wrote them down, I did not want to turn them into scenes, but I did. And
Right.
once I turned them into scenes, I said, well, you know what? There's no way these scenes are going to work in the book
Oh, they worked.
because, and well, so I sat down and I wrote and I reread the draft, and I discovered that it's almost as though, again, story smarter than I am. It's almost as though unconsciously I had left spaces for those scenes because most of those, I think, all but a couple of those scenes slotted right in.
Right.
Now, one of the scenes is a dream about a rape.
Mm.
And the other scene is a young man witnessing his village being pillaged in a very
Right.
brutal way. And I spent the rest of my drafts looking for an excuse to remove those scenes from the story because they embarrassed me.
Right.
I did not want to be seen as someone who could write that
Right.
because they were so horrific in my
Yeah.
mind that I kept looking for a way to remove them. I never found one.
Right.
And before the book was before the final draft, I wrote a screenplay adaptation. Um, I've been of the story. I thought, well, now I can remove those scenes because if I keep those scenes in, it'll be an R-rated movie, and that's not going to work.
Right.
So I thought, yes, I can get rid of those scenes finally.
Right.
And as I'm writing the screenplay, I suddenly have this flash of an insight of a way to get those scenes into the story that is still horrific but not graphic.
Right.
And so the scene stayed. Now, and the scene stayed in the final book as well.
Okay.
And it wasn't until someone reading the book after the book was published explained to me, who could never understand why those scenes had to be in the book, why those scenes had to be in the book, that I understood why. So the Moon Quest, it takes place in a time and a place where stories have been banned and storytellers have been exiled or put to death.
Mm.
So it's a silencing of stories, basically.
Mm.
You cannot tell your stories. Well, in the Moon Quest story, those two scenes I'm talking about were not. You don't see those things as they happen.
Right.
The people they happen to are telling the stories to their companions.
Okay.
Okay, so this reader said to me, "Don't you get it?" He said, "The Moon Quest is a story with the silencing of story. These stories are important in the context of the book because these two characters who are so reluctant to tell their stories must tell their stories for their own growth and healing." And suddenly I saw, well, of course, how could I be so stupid as a writer to not see why these scenes were important? And of course, they were. So to go back to your question, I don't know if those graphic scenes would be considered unhinged, but to me, they felt very unhinged.
Hey, yep, that is unhinged. The question is, what is
Um,
the most unhinged thing you've written? Like
yeah. So
that.
and again, in the Star Quest, rather, there are scenes of torture, and there's scenes of someone actually enjoying watching the torture.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
um, she's the antagonist in the Star Quest. She orders the torture, but she also likes to watch the torture being carried out, or to carry it herself.
Oh my God.
And that was pretty horrific to write as well. But I think I was a little bit numbed already by the having done it in the Moon Quest, so it was. But I have reread the book a few times over the years, and it's hard to read.
Okay.
It's hard to read. It's hard to read partly because I wrote it.
Right.
It's hard. It's hard to see me as being able to write that kind of thing.
Okay, got you.
Um, I don't know how Stephen King felt after he wrote his first horror story,
Yeah,
um, and whether he said, "Oh my God, how can I write stuff like that?" Or maybe he didn't. But that's
right.
how I felt. I felt I
Okay,
don't see myself as someone with that kind of violence in him.
right.
But we all have darkness inside us, and it's way healthier to get out on the page than to go around as a serial killer, I guess. Not I
Right.
guess, certainly. So,
All right. So describe your writing journey, right? If you had to write a
oh,
story centered around it, do you think you could pull it off?
if I had to do what? If I had to,
If you had to write a story centered around your writing journey,
oh, okay. Well, I came late. I know I have a lot of writers say, "Oh, I wanted to write my first novel since I was 3," and I came late, relatively late to the game. I spent my school years running as fast as I could for my creativity.
Mm,
I hated English class. I hated writing essays and compositions in school. Um, yeah, I just all of that I hated. Um, I like to joke that my muse tricked me into becoming a writer.
Ah.
Um, and then until it was too late for me to back away.
Right.
So
Got you.
maybe the first sign was when I was in my freshman year of high school. I was
Right.
given this was before computers. I was given a typewriter, to write, for school.
Yeah. Got you. Got you.
I know it wasn't a Smith Corona, and it wasn't a Royal, and it wasn't one of those very well-known typewriter brands. It was
Yeah.
a brand. It was a Swiss. I imagine it was bought secondhand. It was a Swiss brand called Hermes.
Okay.
Well, Hermes is if you know, Mercury is the Greek god, is the Roman god of communication.
Right.
He's the guy with the winged heel, the winged
Yeah.
heels. Well, Hermes is the Greek equivalent.
Right.
So in my first year of high school, I was given a typewriter named after the Greek god of communication.
Right.
So maybe there was a hint there. I don't know.
Right.
Um, in my in my junior year of high school, um, I was talked into doing publicity for the High School Musical. And I had to learn how to write press releases.
Mm,
Well, press releases, it's a formula, so there was not a lot of creative stress and strain around that.
right.
But that really became the start, because I did that again the following year. I did
Right.
more theater promotion when I was in college and on a freelance basis. Then the first job I got out of college was for a PR company. I had to do
Got you.
more writing. And so I was doing more and more writing,
Ah,
but
okay.
it was not my writing. I was writing press releases. I was writing news
Right.
stories. I was writing, and eventually I started freelancing on the side. I made all these. I was working at the time for um, a major university in Montreal, and I made a lot of media contacts doing public relations. So I started freelancing on the side, and then eventually I quit to freelance full time.
Okay.
Um, but I was still writing other people's stories to other people's deadlines.
Ah, okay.
I was not writing. I was not writing from here, right?
Right.
And then one day, I was living in Toronto at the time. I was freelancing as an editor at a magazine. And one Monday morning, one of the staff editors came in to the office. I was working in house, and she said, "Oh my God, I took this creative writing workshop on Saturday. You have to take it."
Right.
And I kind of made the sign of the cross, and I backed away very slowly, because taking a
Right.
creative writing class was the last thing I would ever have imagined myself doing.
Right.
Because again, what I was doing in my mind wasn't creative.
Right.
I was a skilled wordsmith. I could put words together. I could tell other people's stories, but I was not creative. And
Right.
my kind of cliched, hyper cliched vision of of a creative writing class was: you sat down, you wrote, you stood up and you read what you wrote, and then everyone else in the class got out their machine guns and gunned you down.
Right.
I left
The
and
fire.
left you in a pool and left you in a pool of blood. Well, the next person got up and did the same thing. And I thought, no way in hell am I doing that. But the funny thing about this colleague of mine, this editor, was she was so um, soft spoken, and the absolute antithesis of pushy. She was never any of those things. That day, she kept on at me to take this creative writing workshop,
Uh-huh.
and it was so um, unlike her to do that, or to be like that. And
Right.
finally, I said, "Oh, what the hell? I'll do it." And that workshop changed my life.
Got you.
That began to open me up to my creativity. Um, Ultimately, by working with that instructor, taking more workshops from that instructor over time, began to open up to my spirituality, and that was what changed everything. And by then, I was in my mid to late 30s. So again, slow
Yeah.
start, and
Yeah.
I began writing the Moon Quest um, um, when I was 39.
Okay.
So that's but again, I did not want to be a writer. Last thing, somebody had said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Not a writer. Not any kind of creative artist. I took a business degree in college because I did not that I wanted to be in business, but it just seemed like a sensible thing to do. I didn't know what else to do.
Gotcha.
It was a degree I've never worked in business. Again, my
Right.
first two full-time jobs were in public relations,
Mm-hmm.
and then really I have not had any other kind of professional jobs
Right.
since then. Full-time professional jobs since then. So yeah, I was very much reluctant. I was very much resistant. And the interesting thing about the Moon Quest is that, of course, as I said before, it's a story about the silencing of story, right?
Right.
It's a story with the silencing of creativity. And
Mm,
when I finished writing that first draft, I went, "Holy shit! This is my story.
right.
This is my story of overcoming my creative blocks."
Mm.
And um, And that's probably why I could not have written the first draft in the first person, because then I might have seen that and been so freaked out by it, I couldn't have finished the story.
Right.
Um,
Got you. Got you.
so, so in a sense, the Moon Quest is a parable, the metaphor for my creative journey.
Got you. Okay. All right. Well, that's pretty much all I have for you for this interview. So if you'd like to talk about your coaching program and
Yeah,
and stuff like that, you can
sure.
go ahead.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I also teach writing workshops and I coach writers, and probably from a lot of things that I've said, you get a good idea of my approach, which is very intuitive, no fixed coaching program. It's all about working with wherever an individual writer is when they show up. And I also offer coaching groups. These are small group coaching experiences, no more than 8 people. It's done over 6 weeks on Zoom. Um, I actually have one starting tonight, but tonight won't be tonight when this airs. It'll be in the past. So,
Right.
but I do have one starting up in January, which is already nearly full. Like I say, it's designed whatever issues that an individual writer has, bring he or she can bring to the group, and that's what's addressed. And again, I keep the group small so that everyone gets individual attention. And the cool thing about a coaching group, which makes it in a sense even cooler than one-on-one coaching, which is still pretty cool, is that you get not only the benefit of my 30 years of writing and teaching experience, but you get everyone else's input as well. And what so often happens in these groups is that it's one of the magical things about these groups is that the people who show up tend to have some commonality of issues, even though that's never planned. So that you get to be with people who share some version of what you came into the group with, um, and people get so connected in these groups that often they stay in touch long after the group has ended. That's actually true of my workshops as well, but it's particularly true in the coaching groups because it's more intimate. And people do multiple coaching groups with me. Some of the people in the group that starts tonight are the same people who were in the group that just ended a few weeks ago,
Got
because it's such a powerful experience for them. They want to continue.
oh,
Um, so, but there's more information about my coaching groups, and all my books. I've got 20 books, 21 books. I kind of lost.
I mean,
I
hey,
know. I kind of when I ran out of fingers and toes, I lost count. So,
okay,
but yeah, if you go to markdavidgerson.com, all Mark David Gerson, all one word, you can find the coaching groups, you can find the workshops. I've got some courses on video that you can download, and I've got all 20 books. I've got a recording of guided meditations for writers you can download, and 6 of those books are also on writing and the creative process. So
no,
I've got a book on writer's block. I've got a book on screenwriting. I've got a book on memoir writing. I've got a book called Birthing Your Book, even if you don't know what it's about.
Right.
Um, and I've got a book on editing. I have a very unique take on the editing and revision process. So I've got a book on that as well. So
Got
yeah, check out my website.
it. All righty. And that will conclude the interview. I'd like to thank you for, first off, setting up this Zoom meeting so that we can do the interview and things like that, really came through in the clutch. And, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to interview you and, get an idea of what you do in your writing journey and things of that nature. Um, did you send the written responses over? Uh,
No, I didn't know you wanted written response. I thought
yeah.
those were just going to be those were
Well,
just the
we use
questions you're going to ask me.
written and live. So,
Oh,
like,
I see.
yeah, I
Okay.
take the written responses and I post them on my blog, and
Oh,
then
got it.
I'll
Got
send
it.
you a
Okay.
link after I post it on my blog and stuff. So it'll have this video, it'll have the written responses,
Okay.
it'll
I'll
have
go
all
back and I'll
like
go
that.
back and do those. I just thought you were sending me them so I would know what you were going to ask me. I'll go
Oh,
back
yeah,
and do that
oh,
over
yeah,
the next couple of days
that
for
was
you.
neat. I didn't mention that
No
before
worry. No
you
worry.
but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Like just
Okay. Well, great. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to talk to you. A pleasure to answer your questions.
right.
And yeah, I'll get those written answers to you the next couple of days. I'll do my
Yeah,
best, and just let me know when this is live and whatever links there are, and I'll post those as well, and I will get you the link so you can download the you can
yeah,
download this video.
right. All right. See you on the flip
Okay.
side. And
Okay.
thank
Take care. Thanks again. Bye bye.